Brought to you by DK Audio.
DK Audio presents The Hidden Heroes of Science by Peter Gallivan, read by Louis Hill. What is science? Before we start meeting some scientists, it's important to understand what exactly a scientist is. Even though they all do very different things, from looking at distant planets to looking for new animals in the jungle, there are still things scientists all have in common. Questioning things. Scientists come up with ideas to explain why things are the way they are. They look at the world in detail and suggest explanations for why it could be that way. Experimenting. To really understand if their ideas are correct, scientists do experiments. They measure things in detail, make changes, and see if their ideas hold up. Solving problems. Many scientists work to help make the world a better place. This might be by finding new medicines to treat diseases, or by helping to protect animals which are going extinct. The first scientist. It's hard to really say exactly who the first scientist was. In fact, you could say that the very first humans to walk the earth over 100,000 years ago were scientists. They explored their environment, made tools and equipment to make their lives easier, and generally tried to make sense of planet Earth and the vastness of the universe above them. We only really know if people in the past were doing science if they left behind evidence. Although we have found amazing cave paintings made by these long-distant early human ancestors, we need to go a little further forward in time to meet our first scientists. Imhotep, 2667 BCE to 2648 BCE. The first scientist in this book lived in ancient Egypt, a civilization which started around 5,000 years ago. While you might think it is impossible to know anything about people who lived so long ago, the Egyptians had a secret weapon up their sleeves: writing. Writing it down. At the time of the ancient Egyptians, writing things down had only been around for a few hundred years, so only a few people could read and write. But these scribes wrote down almost everything which happened in society, giving us an amazingly detailed picture of life in ancient Egypt. Some scribes were in charge of the market, recording money and food changing hands. Others were in charge of armies, making sure they had enough supplies to fight. Towering achievements. Perhaps the greatest scribe who lived was a man called Imhotep. Due to his talent with numbers, Imhotep was in charge of designing and constructing buildings for the ruling king, Djoser. Today, we call someone who designs a building an architect, and this job involves a lot of science. They need to understand how different materials can be used in a building to make sure it will be strong and not collapse when they've finished. The largest buildings in ancient Egypt were burial tombs for the kings. Because Imhotep excelled at designing buildings, he was promoted to chief architect and tasked with the biggest job of his life: designing a lavish tomb for the king, taller and more memorable than all others before it. Fun fact: Imhotep was also one of the first doctors in the world. He realized that illness was just a natural part of life and not caused by a curse from ancient gods. Building tool. At the time, most burial tombs were low, blocky buildings. By stacking up 6 of these on top of each other, each smaller than the last, Imhotep created a tall but stable building. He used blocks of stone instead of bricks made from mud to create a long-lasting building. And he was certainly right. The first pyramid he built reached an amazing 61 meters, 200 feet, tall, and still stands today, almost 5,000 years later. King Djoser was so impressed with his pyramid that he wrote Imhotep's name alongside his own on the pyramid, something unheard of at the time. Inspired by Imhotep's innovative design, future scribes went on to design even greater pyramids. 100 years later, the tallest pyramid ever was built, the famous Great Pyramid of Giza. At 147 meters, 482 feet, it remained the tallest human-made structure in the world for over 3,800 years. Changing the world. Imhotep inspired scribes for thousands of years, but faded from memory as other impressive buildings were built across the world. However, the amazing skyscrapers we see reaching towards the sky today owe their inspiration to Imhotep and may be gone in a few hundred years, whilst the solid stone pyramids will stand regardless. Fun fact: soon after Imhotep's death, he was worshipped as a demigod. 2,000 years later, he became known as a god of medicine and healing. Imhotep's influence was so great that even when the ancient Greeks conquered ancient Egypt, they built temples dedicated to him. Hypatia, 335 to 415. Leader of thought. Scientific thinking started in ancient Egypt and soon spread throughout Europe, the Middle East, and Asia. The ancient Greeks, however, really kicked things into overdrive. Where the Egyptians were practical thinkers, the Greeks went even deeper, using the power of a seemingly simple word: why. Thinking it through. The ancient Greeks pioneered a new way of thinking that we now call philosophy. Philosophers are people who try to understand why things are the way they are, the first step of the modern scientific method. Great cities were built around the Mediterranean Sea, containing some of the first universities and libraries in the world. It was here that philosophers did their work, spending hours sitting around thinking and discussing their ideas with others. Not a bad life, really. They summarized their thoughts into theories, attempting to explain everything they could see in the world. Ancient philosophers studied music alongside maths, believing harmonious music showed the purity of maths. What about women? Unfortunately, most of the famous philosophers you might have heard of, Plato, Socrates, Aristotle, are all men. There were, however, some women who went against the grain and made a big impact in this male-dominated world. Hypatia was born in the city of Alexandria in Egypt, one of the great centers of learning in the Roman Empire. This city followed the example set by the ancient Greeks and was home to many famous philosophers. Hypatia's father was an important mathematician at a university and taught his daughter himself, whilst most other girls had to stay and help around the house. This allowed Hypatia to learn in the great library of Alexandria. This was one of the largest libraries in the world at its time, containing thousands of books from ancient philosophers of the last 1,000 years. By the time she was an adult, Hypatia had surpassed her father as a mathematician and thinker, and took over his position as head of the university. Studying and teaching. Hypatia improved lots of ancient Greek mathematics, building and improving on the work that came before her. She also developed the astrolabe, the first mechanical device which could accurately track the movements of stars and planets in the sky. The most important thing Hypatia did, however, was teach others. She regularly gave lectures to the public in Alexandria, helping everyday people understand the work of the great philosophers before her. These were very popular events, with people traveling from across the Roman Empire to hear her. Her teachings explored the idea that numbers are a universal language which can be used to understand how the world works. An education for everyone. Hypatia helped make her city of Alexandria a welcoming and diverse place where more people were able to learn.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?